Now, in light of what we've just heard, let's welcome our next discussion and panelists who will explore ways to transform business towards sustainability. And the underlying idea here is, how do we reconcile two words, eco, or economy, and ecology, which actually refers to exactly the same thing. For those who have studied ancient Greek at school, it comes from ekos, the home, our common home. I didn't, I did Latin, it was very boring. In other words, how can we reconcile economic prosperity with planetary boundaries? So please welcome on stage for this discussion Leila Toplic, who will be the moderator, as well as her panelists Nicole Sautier, Philippe Zawati, Laurence Pezès, and Julia Maris. Please give them a warm welcome. And all the best, Leila. Thank you.
Good afternoon. What a fantastic and inspiring keynote to kick us off to talk about exactly what Charlotte said, which is, what's the role of business in what Jean-Pierre calls the blue revolution? And in this session, we will be discussing how business can specifically reconcile business growth with planetary boundaries, so we can ensure to have actually the planet to live on and do business on. And I'm delighted to be joined by a brilliant group of leaders who are leading this reconciliation work in their organizations, in their industries, and beyond. So it's my pleasure to introduce Julia Maris, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer at ENGIE, where she is responsible for guiding and ensuring the transition to renewable energy. With a background in public service and development policy, she has been at the forefront of ENGIE's efforts to accelerate this shift to a more sustainable energy future. Laurence Pezès is the global head of corporate social responsibility at BNP Paribas. With over a decade of experience at the bank, she has been instrumental in shaping its sustainable finance strategy and driving policies that do align this financial growth with environmental and social responsibility. We have Philippe Zawati, who is the CEO of Mirova, and he has led the firm to align financial returns with positive environmental and social impact, investing in projects that drive the systemic change across various industries. And Nicole Sauter, who is the Director of Global Sustainability at the American Express Global Business Travel. She oversees ESG strategy, and she's focusing on reducing the environmental impact of corporate travel. With extensive experience in sustainability, she leads the initiatives that help clients, so Amex GBT clients, adopt more sustainable travel practices while advancing Amex's own climate goals. Now, welcome, and before we dive in, let me briefly set the stage for the conversation we're about to have. In this session, what we want to do is focus on practical examples of how companies are driving not incremental progress, but actually systemic shifts in how we travel, how we invest, how we power the world. We'll explore how these organizations are rethinking traditional practices to align within these planetary boundaries and move beyond, again, incremental improvements, because we no longer have time for small steps. And three key points to frame this discussion as we dive deeper into these practical examples. First, we simply cannot do business on a dead planet, right? With over 55% of global GDP, equating to around 58 trillion, depending on nature and services, exceeding planetary boundaries is not just an environmental issue. It is a critical business risk. So enabling sustainability and embedding it into the core strategies is essential for long-term business resilience and growth. Point number one. Point number two, we need to shift entire markets. And that's what we want to talk about today. Not just meet ESG targets or check compliance boxes. While current efforts by everyone in the room and more broadly are notable, unfortunately, they fall short of addressing the scale of the climate challenge that we all face. So we need to shift from incremental progress, also from a siloed approach. And what I mean by that is where sustainability efforts are disconnected from business models and financial targets, to more integrating sustainability into the core of the business strategy. And we know that this is actually good for business, because the research shows that the companies that prioritize sustainability as a central part of their business model, rather than treating it as a compliance issue, they consistently outperform their peers. So that was point number 2. And point number 3, diverse leadership is essential for driving the systemic change and securing a sustainable future for all. The research shows that companies with women in leadership positions are more likely to adopt environmentally responsible practices, including renewable energy investments and emissions reductions. With that in mind, let's explore how business leaders are aligning their strategy with ecological realities, how they're reconciling profitability and sustainability, and ultimately redefining what success looks like. So what I want to start with is a lightning round. So we talk about reconciling business growth and sustainability. Well, what is actually needed? And very briefly, just to kick us off, what is needed to do this? So let's start with Nicole on the other side of the panel.
Yeah, thank you. Your question about reconciling business growth and sustainability translates into my day-to-day professional life into the following question, and that is, Nicole, what's the business case for sustainability? A question I'm often asked. And here I want to reference a timely report, actually, only from last week by Climate Disclosure Project, CDP, that highlights that the estimated cost associated to future climate risks for corporates, for example, regulatory risks, changing consumer behavior, is 3 times greater, 3 times, than the estimated cost associated with tackling those climate issues at source today. So in other words, investing in sustainability is a net gain for business, makes business sense. And yes, GDP is highly dependent on nature, but we also know that many countries across the globe have managed already to increase GDP whilst reducing carbon emissions. They managed to decouple economic growth from carbon. Now let's do the same with industry. And finally, at Amidst GBT, we obviously champion travel as a force for good. But we all know that travel today is inextricably linked to carbon. So our mission is to help break that link, transform the industry by pursuing our own net zero pathway, helping clients to reduce emissions from their travel, and working with the industry to pool finance and demand for the technologies we know we need to get to net zero.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you also for really framing this business case for reconciling growth with sustainability. Laurence, what do you see from where you sit, which is a very important industry for driving this reconciliation that is banking industry?
Thank you for the question. So definitely for us, we are the leading bank in the Eurozone with a global outreach. It's not financing the world as it is. It's financing the world as we want it to be. So it requires a clear vision. And our strategic plan is called Growth, Technology, Sustainability. So it's some kind of answer to your question. It's a statement that we believe that growth, business growth, and sustainability can go hand in hand. So it means, of course, putting sustainability at the core of the way we do business with the support of the board, but also the buying and the alignment of the business people, the risk department, and the training of the bankers on the field. So we have a sustainability academy which has already trained 120,000 people, and it's critical because it's in any decision we take that we have to walk the talk. So also, I think it's necessary to have public commitments. We have taken the commitment to align our activities with net zero scenario by 2050, which means that we have to reduce the CO2 emissions that are associated with our financing in the most emitting sectors of activity with this trend of reduction. And when it comes to energy, and I will finish with this example, because energy is the underlying of a lot of industries, as you know, heavy industry, mobility, etc. So it's core. Currently, when you finance the production of energy, 35% is based on fossil fuels, which means already 65% comes from renewable and nuclear energy. And we've taken a commitment to have only 10% coming from fossil fuels by 2030. So it's not the world as it is, and it needs bold decisions.
Thank you, Laurence. I think you're emphasizing two things that are critical, which is the internal transformation and bringing everybody along on the journey, but also this kind of opportunity and power that you have in the space to leverage your lending power to actually drive the broader transition that we need to see. Julia, speaking of energy, you work in energy space, so what does reconciling growth and including energy needs look like with reconciling that with planetary boundaries?
Thank you for this question, and as you just mentioned, there is a capillary effect with energy, because the energy here today, all together, we are connected to the grid. We use energy. If this energy is carbonized, we collectively have a bad CO2 footprint. If we allow you to access to less carbonized energy, this is better for everybody. Some sectors are easier to decarbonize than others. This is why the energy actors have a key role to play in the decarbonization of the whole system. So what do we do in ENGIE? We used to be, and we still have a strong fossil gas DNA, but we are shifting the model in depth. We have decided first to exit coal power, power that is built from coal. We'll exit coal in Europe by 2025 and worldwide by 2027. This is tomorrow. Coal today is only 2% of our capabilities. It used to be 7% in 2017, so it's a big shift. Second thing we do, we invest massively in renewable power. Hydropower, wind power, offshore and onshore, and as well solar power. These are big moves, sometimes difficult to implement. We have some acceptability issues, and permitting is not always easy, but we want to do this. And everybody says, oh, renewable energy, they are intermittent, you can't trust them. This is why we invest at the same time on battery system to store this electricity built from renewable sources of energy and to bounce this energy to the grid when needed. So it balances the system. And we are, as well, investing in another source of renewable energy, which is renewable gases, such as biomethane, which comes from agricultural waste, and low-carbon hydrogen, which is a very promising tendency and technology for the future. So this means lots of money, of course. We need to generate profits. This is where we can reconcile economic growth with sustainability. You need to make profits to invest in those technologies, but there is no other way to decarbonize the system.
Yeah, such an important point, both in terms of what are we going to stop doing, and then how do we deploy capital into what we want the future to look like. And speaking of capital, Philippe, you sit at that important intersection of capital and the solutions that will power the world in the future. So what does reconciling growth, business growth, look like for you?
So first, I'm so happy to be, for the first time in my life, the male alibi in a panel. I mean, very difficult to answer in 2 sentences because we wrote a full book about this with Dominique Bourg, which is exactly about finance and the planetary boundaries. But anyway, I think we have an issue. We have a problem. When you say altogether, I mean that we can reconcile profit and planet, and that it's not a climate issue; it's an economic issue. That's a good news, because if it's an economic issue, then the system will solve it, because the objective of the system is to make profit. So if there is a real link between profit and ecology, we have no issue at all. That everything is perfect. But the reality is that it's not true. It's that there is a huge incentive in the system today to create non-sustainable businesses. That's the issue. there is a big incentive in the system today, for example, to continue to set up coal operations, or to invest in massive, very massive AI models that will use an exponential quantity of energy that we don't have. So the question is here, to reconcile means to disincentivize these businesses which are harmful for the planet. And for this, I mean, we not only need to invest in green, but we need to completely transform the way the existing economy is behaving, and we need also a lot of new regulation to do this.
Yeah, thank you actually for mentioning the role of incentives, and also the role that government, for example, has to play in partnership with the business to drive this transition. So I want to now come back and dive into practical examples, because we promised the group that we will talk about, well, what does that actually look like? And what are not only the good things that are happening, but what are the challenges that we're facing? Laurence, I want to come back to you. Earlier, you mentioned the work that you're doing that is focused on shifting from, let's say, what you shared with me in the prep call, which is from brown to green, and then deploying that capital towards the net zero industries or net zero solutions. Well, can you explain specifically how BNP's lending criteria, so this is really looking at the world, not just inward, how your lending criteria actively drives this market behavior towards this future that we want to see?
Sure. Well, talking about profits, when you finance the energy sectors, you have two different choices. Short-term one, which is well, the demand for oil and gas is increasing. It's very profitable. It's easy money for us. We know our clients very well. So just keep financing, well, business as usual. Or you can think long-term and consider with the economies which are going to transition to net zero progressively, with fossil assets, and the players which are concentrated on fossil fuels are going to transform into stranded assets at one point. So it's wise, it's a long-term risk management to shift your business model and to focus on low-carbon energies. So for example, when we finance utilities in the world or big oil and gas players, there is a red line that we don't want to cross. We don't want to contribute, even indirectly, to the additional capacities of oil and gas being put at the disposal of the industries and the customers. So if we don't want to contribute to additional capacities, we don't want to finance the upstream part of the value chain, the exploration and production, because that's in this segment that it may happen that your money, when you lend in money to a client, will contribute to additional capacities. So it means we don't finance any new project, of course. We no longer finance the pure players of the exploration production in the value chain, which means that we have to phase out from long-time clients. And when we go and see diversified players, for example, Engie, we tell them, well, we love you, of course, we are dear clients, but we don't want to finance anymore the brown part of your activity. We want to support your transition, and we want to finance the green. So sometimes the client is not very happy with us because it's kind of cherry picking and they don't like it, but most of the time they understand. But the trouble is the financing which are dedicated to the green part are not the bulk of the financing. You have what we call general purpose. It means that when you lend money to a client, he can do whatever he wants with the money. So he can finance green technologies, renewables, green hydrogen, etc. But it can also develop additional capacities. So we no longer participate in this general purpose. Big syndicated credits, it's something very important. I'm talking $7 billion. And it's usually public, so it's reported in league tables. So it's visible. It's something which is very rapidly noticed by the market. So by doing so, first, we send a signal to our client. We send a signal to the market, because of course we talk to each other. We send a signal to our peers, the banks, because if we want to have an impact, we have to do the same thing together. And also, we appear, of course, as a first mover, which has several advantages from a risk perspective, but also for our reputation, for well, our staff are happy with us because we are walking the talk, and because it's in line with what we want to do and the public commitments we took. So that's how it works in practice. So it's very hard for the people in the field, the bankers, because it's not something you do naturally. Usually, you go to see your client, say, whatever you want, we will do it. Whereas here, we have to stick to our commitments.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a fantastic example of just intentionality around how to leverage your lending power. And love this also concept of having a perspective on some of these assets, the brown assets being stranded assets in the future too. Nicole, so corporate travel is something that most of us do, but it is often criticized for its large, very large carbon footprint. Flights account for about 90% of business travel emissions. So what concrete steps has American Express Global Business Travel taken to reduce its environmental impact, particularly with air travel emissions?
Yeah, thank you for that question. A question I have heard before, as you can imagine, in my role. So first, let me take one step back, remind us of the theme of this fantastic forum, reconciliation. In my professional role, as well as personally as a traveler and as an expat, for us to overcome conflict, I firmly believe we have to connect, communicate, create those meaningful relationships. And travel does play a key role in this. Now, business travel can take many shapes. Being here today is one. Organizing a global employee gathering to foster corporate culture is another. Meeting your clients to shake hands, you name it. We absolutely welcome the flexibility that the Zooms and the Teams of the world give us, but we have to invest in a long-term viable future for this industry. And now here's the added challenge, and you've alluded to it already, which is that the vast majority of emissions, over 90% indeed, when we look at our own clients' footprint and our own from business travel, the vast majority of business travel emissions come from air travel, come from flying. And aviation is considered one of those hard-to-abate sectors that are considered relatively difficult to decarbonize compared to others for many reasons. And we know that we will need a range of fairly new technologies, some of them very new technologies, that we need to scale. Sustainable aviation fuels, the green hydrogens, the electrification, the carbon removals, you name it. It's a huge challenge. To answer your question, though, for all those reasons, Amidst GBT, we invest in a suite of solutions to help our clients measure, manage and mitigate emissions from the travel they book with us. And that includes, for example, first and foremost, solutions to track and report on the emissions from a travel program. We need to measure, to manage. And it's not just about reporting, it's also about moving towards more granular reporting. If you look at air travel, you can report on emissions from air travel just by taking into account the distance that you fly and the cabin class. Or you can move towards what's called fuel-based calculations, which include things like, what aircraft type am I flying on? Is it 19 years old, or is it a neo, is it a brand new aircraft, much more carbon efficient? Is it a fully loaded plane? Is there belly cargo? You name it, you get the picture. All of this impacts your carbon footprint per traveler. That's one example. And then we make that data, that sustainability information, carbon, available to the traveler during the booking process in our own booking platforms, so that the corporate traveler can truly see, okay, I can filter by the most carbon efficient flight, and I will always see prominently when rail is available as an alternative over air. So things like this is how we engage the traveler in the journey. And then some clients tell us, I would love to invest in a sustainability initiative to reduce my footprint. I don't have the funds. For that reason, we launched carbon pricing. The idea that our clients today and us ourselves as a business, we assign a carbon fee, monetary fee, for every ton of CO2 that is emitted from our travel. We show that fee to the traveler to create greater awareness, because John and Jenny from finance might not know what 0.5 ton CO2 means, right? Maybe it's better to show it in monetary terms. And then the other part is we actually facilitate the collection of those funds in the background every time a flight is booked. We're growing a green fund for our clients that is then invested in initiatives, for example, beyond the value chain, in carbon removals or in sustainable aviation fuel. And finally, sustainable aviation fuel, I do want to highlight, is an alternative to fossil-based jet fuel made from renewable feedstocks. It is widely considered today, at this point, the most important solution to reduce emissions from flying. But we have to scale it significantly. And that's why one of our, I'd say, most important initiatives is we launched our own SAF program together with industry partners, where we ask our clients to invest in SAF for the emissions reductions associated to help scale this new technology at pace.
Nicole, thanks so much also for putting an emphasis on the fact that we need to understand our carbon footprint, and then there's no single solution. We need to decarbonize, we need to invest in what the future is going to look like, so whether it's SAF, but we also need to take accountability for our emissions, and that's where carbon removal plays a role. Julia, let's talk about energy. So ENGIE's work on shifting to renewables and also transforming the energy sector as a whole. What does that look like in terms of operationalizing that at the company day to day?
Yeah, operationalization is my obsession because I think for the past years, all companies have been really good in storytelling and the narrative. But we are reaching a tipping point now. We have to do things and make it happen. So we have committed to be net zero by 2045. We follow what we call a well below 2-degree trajectory by 2030, according to SBTi, but a 1.5, so aligned with the Paris Agreement trajectory, according to the International Agency for Energy and to Moody's, who has assessed our trajectory. Concretely speaking, when you say, I'll be this level of emission by 2030 aligned with the Paris Agreement, how do you make this happen in depth in your company? So we have decided, I think we were the first ones to do that, but since some peers have copied us, and that's good, I think, for the business, we have decided to copy the business plan logic we have in finance. All listed companies have a kind of 3-year business plan, medium-term plan, whatever the name you give to it. You share with the market what are going to be your financial guidance, where you view the financial results of your company in the 3 years. We have taken exactly the same business assumptions as the one that lead to this financial communication, and we have translated that into CO2 emissions. So if we say to the market, we'll be at that level of profitability, at the same time, it means that level of CO2. We have tried to push that until 2030 to make sure those business assumptions are in line with our CO2 trajectory. And we have derived that business by business. So today in ENGIE, all global business units, they have their yearly CO2 budget, a ceiling they cannot exceed, each year from now until 2030, and this ensures that we'll meet the targets we have publicly committed to. The objectives we have taken publicly for 2030, when you combine all of them, they cover 99% of our carbon footprint. So the whole carbon footprint of the group is covered by public objectives that are accounted. You can register them, you can witness the results and see where we land. I think this public commitment is very important as well. And it is the logic of reconciliation, because in a company, you finish by having so many contradictory injunctions. A bit like you said, Philippe. We want business to be profitable, and if profitability leads to sustainability, no problem. Well, actually, these are contradictory injunctions in the short term, at least. Because in the short term, if you are a business developer and you're incentivized to more order intakes, in the short term, you're not going to push for long-term, green, sustainable projects that are going to be long and hard to obtain. You are going to push for small, very profitable fossil business. So what have we done? In addition to what I described with the CO2 trajectory and the yearly budget for business, we have added CO2 incentives in the individual bonuses of the people. So you get money and your bonus if you are good at business, but if you are in line with your CO2 targets, if you exceed them, you are penalized. This is the way you really reconcile in an operational way, on the ground, the sustainability and the profitability logic.
Great, thank you so much, Julia, for just diving deeper into like, what does it take to actually, there you go. So hopefully some of you are taking notes. So have a carbon emissions ceiling and also link the business incentives or business development incentives to decarbonization and just track it. Yeah, have a commitment, but also know how to do this. I want to come back to Philippe, and I know we're sort of running out of time. We could have this conversation for the next 2 hours, right? Philippe, I want to talk more about the role of capital in driving the systemic change. If you could just give one or two practical examples from the work you're doing at Mirova.
Yeah, yes, of course. I mean, we manage about 30 billion euros, which is a lot of money and a very small amount of money compared to the big amounts that the biggest investors in the planet have to manage. I mean, look at the BlackRock and others who manage 10,000s of billion euros. So the question is, when you have a lot of money, how can you make some smart choices and really invest your capital in the right direction? Basically, if you let's say there is only one. Let's assume that there is only one investor in the planet with all the money. He would invest in the economy as it is, because he wouldn't be able to do anything else. So just making some difference between the business as usual is very difficult when you get money. So with 30 billions, we can do it. With thousands of billions, it would be difficult. But it's really very important because the businesses need signals. And one signal is clearly regulation. You are driving your business through the regulation. But another signal is the way you can be financed. And so our job as responsible investors is to show that we can scale financing of green assets, green businesses, and also transition businesses, because it's not only, again, about only investing in green. So this is what we do in investing in companies, in equities, in green bonds, but also directly into projects, into renewable energy projects, into new mobility, clean mobility projects, into also sustainable agriculture, but also not only in developed countries, and this is something I also want to stress, because today there is a huge amount of money, but all this money is invested in the same area, in developed countries. And so out of the 30 billion we manage, we have 1 billion euro invested in emerging countries, which is small, but I mean, massively bigger than the average of the market. And today, this is also something very, very key, even in terms of gender equality, if we speak about this.
Great, thank you so much, Philippe. We're out of time, but what I want to just come back to is what might be one key go-do from your perspective, one key takeaway for this group to act on as we wrap up this session and as everyone goes back to their organizations, either speaking on like a specific sector level or more broadly. Nicole, let's start with you and just keeping it very brief.
Very brief. One takeaway and one go-do. Takeaway that I'd like to pass on would be, number one, in my opinion, in sustainability, we often get hung up in incrementalism. We're looking or we're waiting for the perfect solution along the lines of, let's not do anything until we know everything. When we know, we must be doing everything full stop. So transformation is government enabled, but private sector led. So it's just a call to action to all business leaders to act now, help us scale the technologies we know we need to get to net zero. And the go-do is, if you have time, look up UN climate champion Nigel Topping's 3 simple rules. That is 3 simple rules to decarbonize any industry.
Great. Philippe.
Very sad not of time to speak about our Women Leaders Funds, for example, and the way we invest in company where at least there are 30% of female in the ExCom, to also speak about the link between gender equality, diversity, and the profitability of business. So maybe next time.
Next time, and look it up for sure on the website. Laurence, what could be a key go-do or takeaway?
I have two, actually. We talked a lot about decarbonization, CO2 emissions, but it's not, well, planetary boundaries. It means also protecting nature, paying attention to human rights, social inclusion, etc. So we have to have the whole full picture in mind when we make choices. And second is, I am personally convinced that if we want to have an impact, we have to join forces and work in coalitions. Coalition between corporates and financial institutions, or lots of banks. And that's why I personally dedicate a lot of time to a UN initiative, which is called the Principles for Responsible Banking, that gather 350 financial institutions who do business in the same way. So basically, they're committed to contributing to the Paris Agreement and the SDGs. And I think this is critical if we want to have an impact, working together.
Brilliant. Join the coalition. And Julia?
I would say if I have one main takeaway, it would be not to leave those issues to the community of the sustainability experts. These subjects have to move from our desks and go to the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer desk, to the IT guys, to the legal part. So if you are working in all those sectors and you are not specifically working on sustainability, I really invite you to just reflect on how in my daily job can I contribute or give something to embark those sustainability issues, as you said, not only carbon footprint, but biodiversity, water, human rights, social responsibility, communities, responsible purchasing, all these aspects. Their sustainability should be everywhere in the company and not just in the hands of experts.
What a perfect ending. So climate or sustainability is everyone's job, regardless of where you sit in the organization. Thank you very much for this conversation. To be continued, do look up what these organizations are doing with regards to sustainability, but also diversity, as Philly pointed out. Thanks very much.
Many, many thanks to all of you. Many thanks to you, Leila, for your fantastic moderation. And I wanted to point out that Philippe Zawati, you are not just indeed the token man in what would otherwise be a mammal, see, a family, sorry. Mirova is strongly committed to women's empowerment and very committed to change. And your foundation has been the main and a very, very generous benefactor to humanity diaspora, Femtech, and humanitarian aid NGO I have the pleasure to chair. So thank you very much for that.